Hello, welcome back to the Murakami Companion podcast, a show inspired by the works of Haruki Murakami, where we analyze his body of work in its entirety. Today we'll be talking about Dance, 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 which is a sort of four-part of a trilogy, or maybe a spin-off. And as always, mild spoilers. Also, there will be small spoilers for the Blade Runner franchise, so watch out for that too. So, as you may know, Murakami's work begins with Hear the Wind Sing, directly followed by Pinball 1973 and A Wild Ship Chase a little bit after that. The last book kinda closes the trilogy of the rat because at the end the rat, let's say, goes away. But we still have the narrator, which is half of the main duo, and it's the main character of Dance Dance Dance. I would like to propose a different way to organize this narrative. This is better understood as two duologies, two pairs of books. The Wind Pinball duology tells one story that has one tone and one style, and the Ship Dance duology tells something completely different. The first duology is a realistic story about being young and irresponsible. The second duology is a magical story about facing adulthood and responsibilities. So, why is the magical realism put on the adult part of the story instead of the youngest part? Well, the narrator now lives in a world that is much bigger. It doesn't limit itself to a bar, an apartment, and a couple of friends, but he is now out in the world and he faces challenges he can't quite fully understand. Which is an interesting inversion of the usual trope that the world is less magical once you grow old. Dance 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 begins with our narrator being depressed a few years after the events of the previous books, when he suddenly remembers that his girlfriend disappeared in the previous book. A little bit late, I would like to add. So he goes back to the Dolphin Hotel looking for clues to find her, which is interesting because it's no out of the realm of possibility that in the last book she gets possessed by the titular ship spirit, this sort of evil entity. So is she? We never find out, because this girl, Kiki, only appears as an hallucination, or maybe it's a dream. She never shows up because she really doesn't matter. All she needs to do in the story is to send the narrator on his way to meet new people and to live a new adventure that ends with him getting out of depression and finally moving on with his life. Whether she's a ghost or an hallucination of the narrator, or if she's really out there possessed by the ship, it doesn't matter. And that's alright, because part of the charm of the last book is that we are never sure what happens to her, and this book doesn't contradict any theory or interpretation that you might have on A Wild Ship Chase. It's kinda like that movie, the Blade Runner sequel by Denis Villeneuve, that deliberately doesn't shine a light on the ambiguity of the ending of the original movie. It just goes along with it, so it doesn't disappoint anyone. Moving on. The narrator then goes back to the Dolphin Hotel of the previous book, but finds out it's been sold and a new Dolphin Hotel has been built over it. So he meets a girl that works there, makes friends with a teenage girl, and then goes to see a movie starring an old classmate that, oh surprise, the movie also stars Kiki, his ex-girlfriend. These three characters are interesting because the girls that work in the hotel, it's a possible love interest. It's a possible future, but he needs to leave the past behind to be able to be with her. On the other hand, the teenage girl is like the present. They hang around, they go meet her family, they go on vacations together. They get along really well, and this may symbolize that the narrator is stuck on the past, that he's still immature in some ways, and that's why he feels a connection with this teenage girl. And the old classmate that made the movie that also starred Kiki, he obviously represents the past that he needs to let go, that the narrator needs to let go, but also the temptations of just sticking with the past. Everything that has to do with the past in this book, it's kinda rotten. It's visions of the old Dolphin Hotel that it's in ruins. It's the memory of an ex-girlfriend he travels the country looking for, but he couldn't even remember her name up until where the narrator sees her name in the credits of the movie. It's the ex-classmate that kinda obviously is not a very good person. The present, the teenage girl, and let's address the elephant in the room. If this guy wasn't our narrator, if we weren't literally inside his head and knew he only had good intentions and that he sees this girl as his little sister, we will 100% think something is off. He really shouldn't hang around teenage girls like this, and her parents shouldn't let him hang around like that either. This is briefly addressed when the father of the girl hires a prostitute for the narrator in hopes that she will satisfy any possible needs that he may try otherwise to satisfy with her daughter, which is actually the first time our narrator even considers that his relationship with the teenage girl might look weird for other people. But yeah, it is weird. But I will say it's even weirder that her parents are allowing this. Like, when you follow the story, you kinda get it. The teenage girl is pretty much abandoned and forgotten by her parents and start to hang around this big brother figure that is the narrator. He's alright, she knows he's alright, we know he's alright. He is her main character after all. But it's kinda odd for her parents to just accept this, to just roll with it. But it's also a reflection of how little they care about her. Because he is our narrator, we are inside his head. And I think this whole issue reflects very positively on him, because he is 100% respectful and doesn't even think about the teenage girl in any sexual way. So much he doesn't even think the situation is weird. This is just his little surrogate sister. But it really reflects badly on the parents. I don't think people talk enough about how terrible those parents are. And I know they are not like violent or anything, but they just often forget their daughter exists. They even offer like a fully paid expensive vacations so they don't have to spend time with the girl, which is crazy. Many people will say that having parents that give you your own apartment and pay for expensive vacations are great people, but they're just not. These guys aren't doing this out of love. Also, the parents are divorced and the mother has a new boyfriend who is just a cool and relaxed American guy who is missing an arm. He starts as an ultra secondary character and then he dies. And the accidental death of this secondary character is a major plot point in this book. I just feel really sorry for this dude. He deserved way better. Then, spoiler alert, we find out that the old classmate is a murderer and that he is kinda just a broken person. and he's behind the murder that should be an important plot point. But it doesn't feel like an important plot point because we barely met the character that died. And I think that when you finish reading this book, you will barely remember that the murder was one of the two big mysteries of the book, the other being where is Kiki, the ex-girlfriend. And that's not even resolved at all, because this is not about the murder. This is not about finding Kiki. It's about how these things made the narrator get out of bed, meet new people, and drive the plot forward. But the plot is him growing up. He isn't moving forward in life, so what he needs to do is to understand what is obstructing the flow and removing it. The narrator is a man that went through insane magical events on the previous books. A whole trilogy of books, if you want to see it that way. His story is really over, but he can move on with his life because there's nothing else for him to do. The end of the third book, A Wild Sheep Chase, doesn't really leave him in a good spot, so he starts by the only loose ends he has, which are Kiki and the Dolphin Hotel, and that puts him in a weird path towards a happy ending. At last. Is that what the book is trying to teach us? Maybe. At this point, Murakami has released so much more successful books than those in the trilogy that he doesn't really need to go back to them, and actually he was reluctant to publish the first two books translated to English because he didn't feel that they were up to his quality standards. So why come back to it? I think a lot of us have insane stories in our youth. Parts of our lives that are magical, that are stories we will tell when we are older. And sometimes we have a hard time adjusting ourselves to the fact that it might be over and we might feel lost. And it's a good thing to say, hey, there's a few loose ends. There's this thing I wanted to do that I never got to do. There's these people that I never sat down to talk with again that I would like to have a talk with. There's this place I should go visit again. And it doesn't mean that your future lays in your past, but rather that taking a good look at your past might help you move the plot of your life forward. It might lead you to meet new people and visit new places and shake things a little bit. It might even put a few new cards in your hand. The narrator just had the Kiki card and the Dolphin Hotel card, and by playing those cards, he drew new ones, new connections, new places, new resources, and he rearranged his hand to build that new life. It's interesting because Murakami is famous for leaving some things unresolved in his books, which might have been because since he started his career with a Trilogy, a series, he needs to have loose ends, so if he chooses to write a sequel, he will have a starting point. Ironically, he never, so far as the recording of this podcast, wrote another sequel to anything after that. But the loose ends give the story a sense of reality. In real life, not all loose ends are resolved. Not all plot points are addressed. Sometimes you just don't know what happened to that childhood friend, or you break up with someone and cut ties with their family and you never find out what became of them. That teacher that talked about her divorce during your classes in high school, you never find out if she found love again. You just graduated and moved on. That former co-worker that wanted to quit his job and build his own business with his wife, unless you spend your whole life stalking everyone you meet, you might never find out what happened with that. But if you're depressed and you don't know what to do with your life, why not? Why not check out those loose ends? Not so you're going back to live in the past, that's not healthy or helpful, but to see what new places those loose ends lead to. Finally, I want to briefly address something. The big loose end from this book. Big spoilers. The narrator left his city of origin to start a new life with the girl he meets at the Dolphin Hotel. What is the loose end? He never says goodbye to Yuki, the teenage girl. The girl is pretty much abandoned by her parents, has a very special platonic bond with the narrator, which is reciprocal. They had a routine of calling each other and meeting, and they went to adventures together. He is the only person she can really trust, and he just leaves without even calling her. She can't even go around and find him. She has no way of knowing where he went or even if he's alive. And across all 4 books, this is as much as an asshole as our narrator has ever been, and it's the 3rd act of the 4th book. And he does this without a real reason. He just gets so excited about starting a new life with the girl that works in the Dolphin Hotel that forgets about his friend Yuki. There's a point of the book where he drives her, I believe near a train station or something. He gets down the car and he says that that's the last time he saw her. Which, being a book narrated in the first person, means that time-wise or fictitious narrator is talking from the end of the book. He doesn't know what happens after the book ends. So it's not wrong to imagine that they might meet once again many years down the line. That is what open endings are for, so we can choose individually what happens to those loose ends. They even talk about a few times about the future, about being friends forever, about him going to her wedding. So it's just weird that he ends up being so dismissive of his loyal friend Yuki as soon as he decides to start a new life somewhere else. Even if we are free to imagine they meet somewhere down the line, it's a little bit sour to know that he didn't even say goodbye. Especially since the narrator is a character that has been heard across 4 books by characters that left him without saying goodbye. And his only actual purely positive relationship was with the twins in the 2nd book, and that goodbye with them was a big moment. It's really out of character for the narrator, but barely damages what it's otherwise a fantastic book. We can only imagine a 5th book where all the surviving characters from all previous books met again with the narrator, maybe at the end of his life. Dance 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 was published in Japan in 1988, so I will say the saga is over, but it's interesting to imagine that. What happened to the girlfriend from the 1st book? The business partner? The twins? Yuki and her family? How would an adult Yuki reflect on the events of Dance Dance Dance? Would she like to meet the narrator again? Or would she feel abandoned by him? Because once Yuki, the teenage girl, enters the book, she becomes the driving force behind the story, even more so than the search for Kiki, the ex-girlfriend. And it all points towards the idea that the narrator and the girl from the Dolphin Hotel might end up together, and Yuki could be their surrogate daughter. But Yuki just leaves the book. Probably because there is like a little bit of tension because everyone thinks the relationship is weird and inappropriate except for them. So how will this new, much younger girlfriend he ends up with react to him wanting to keep this teenage girl around? This is an incredibly interesting question that we don't get an answer for, but that's just Murakami. It's always great, but you can always expect the story to go the way you think it's gonna go, like in real life. You can get Dance 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 pretty much anywhere online or where good books are sold. If you want to support this podcast or you just like cool t-shirts or maybe some coffee mugs or art prints, we got a few digital stores where you can find all of that and more featuring the cover artwork for this episode. Inspired, of course, by Dance Dance Dance. There will be one design for each episode release of this podcast.